I have no announcements to make at this point in time, and I can't believe that I need to be introduced to you before I begin my presentation. But I want to take a minute to express my sincere thanks to our club secretary, Winnie Hayek, for her assistance. She prepared every one of the slides I use in my talk, and she did a beautiful job. And so thank you, Winnie. Thank you. Are you ready to begin? Let's do it, okay? Good afternoon. My objective in preparing this talk has been to highlight the impact that Italians have made on the history of the Western world. I'm going to lead you through centuries of history from 750 years before the birth of Christ to modern times. And I hope you find it interesting and informative. Italy is located on a peninsula, on an isolated peninsula in southern Europe. It's shaped like a boot, and it's bordered by the Tyrrhenian Sea on this border, and on the Mediterranean and I'll get started here in a minute, Adriatic Seas, and today. And it's bordered on land by France, Switzerland, Austria, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, and Herzegovina. So it's surrounded all around this, in this perimeter in here. The two islands off the coast of Italy, Sicily and Sardinia, are under Italian rule. Now, Italy itself has been settled for over 3,000 years. But the Italian civilization that we recognize as our heritage did not appear on the screen of history until 750 years before the birth of Christ. At that time, legend has it, a royal princess was seduced by Mars, the god of war. She gave birth to twin boys, and the king, her father, in a fit of anger and wary of having any potential competition for his throne, had the babies torn from their mother's arms, placed in a basket, and set adrift on the river Tiber to die from exposure. But the basket washed up on the riverbank, and the hungry babies were found by a she-wolf. The wolf nursed the babies and cared for them until they were rescued by a shepherd. The shepherd and his wife named the babies Romulus and Remus and raised them as their own. But when grown, they had become influential in their village, and they decided to build their own on the riverbank where their basket had landed. They couldn't agree on an exact site, and in an argument, Romulus killed his brother Remus, and he built a village named Rome in his honor on the Palatine Hill. And this next slide shows the bronze statue of the she-wolf nursing the twins, a symbol of their ancient heritage that's revered by the Romans, that was revered by the Romans. Now, over the next 400 years, the village became the city of Rome, which gradually conquered and absorbed all its neighbors up and down the peninsula. And by 300 BC, Rome was the capital of a unified Roman Republic. But conquering the mainland, the Italian mainland, did not ensure their peace. Another civilization had grown to major power status on the northwestern coast of Africa, and this was Carthage. And if you look here, can you give me the other next slide, Winnie, please? Carthage is right here, down in here. Okay? Carthage had developed a very aggressive merchant marine, and they controlled commerce in the western Mediterranean, including the island of Sicily. The Romans were not happy. The Romans were not happy with this infringement on this. Are we having a problem? Okay. The Romans were not happy with this infringement on their sphere of influence, and relations between the two nations deteriorated into the Punic Wars. This were 3 wars that were fought over a period of, believe it or not, 118 years. Now, Rome managed to win all 3 of them, but the second war was the most memorable. The famous Carthaginian general Hannibal led his troops and his elephants, here you can see, which the Italians had never seen an elephant, led his elephants across the Alps and invaded Italy. He started way down here and went all the way up through here and then down into Italy like here. His campaign lasted 17 years and ravaged the Italian peninsula. They were trying times for the Romans, but he was finally defeated by Scipio Africanus. The Romans started the 3rd war, and in 3 years, they invaded Carthage in North Africa. They defeated the Carthaginian army, and the inhabitants were sold into slavery. The city was burned and plowed into the ground, never to rise again. Rome then began a series of conquests to put them in control of the then known Western world. Now let's move forward to a date 100 years before the birth of Christ, when Julius Caesar came into the picture. He was born into an aristocratic Roman family, the Julians. He was not well known in his early days, but he was active in politics. And he eventually became a consul and accepted a 5-year assignment to govern that part of Gaul that was then under Roman control. He set forth with his legions. They marched from Rome to their station in Gaul. No tanks, no armored cars, and they walked the whole way. That's what they used to do in those days. The unsettled condition of the territory he found himself in transformed him. He saw the opportunity to bring vast areas under Roman control, and he could envisage the benefit to his country and to his own fortunes that would ensue. He proceeded to conquer the rest of Gaul and its surrounding territories and bring them under Western rule. In the process, his army invented and utilized war machinery that made them invincible, including catapults that threw cannonballs and mechanical missile launchers. And look at all of the other apparatus that they built. These are the things that they used in war. This is a catapult here, and this is another here. And then also, this is the way those Roman legions dressed when they were on campaign. His aggressive campaigns extended Roman control over the entire area that is now France, Spain, Britain, and parts of Belgium, Holland, Switzerland, and Croatia. Those are the areas that Caesar brought under control. This general, who had had very little experience as a field commander, developed into a military genius, who has been ranked with Alexander the Great as one of the 2 greatest generals in history. His commentaries on the Gallic War, in which he described his campaigns and military strategies, is one of the greatest written works of history to reach us from antiquity. His exploits changed the course of history for Rome and set the groundwork for the nations who would grow into our modern Europe. And that it was in those 5 years he spent in Western Europe that he apparently set his goal to become the absolute master of the Roman Republic and to reform it. When he returned to Rome, he was hailed as a conquering hero. He was appointed dictator for life and assumed leadership of the Republic. He had almost 10 years of this public life, but a group of senators believed he wanted to become emperor, and eliminate the republic. And on the Ides of March, March 15th, 44 years before the birth of Christ, the conspirators assassinated him in the Senate chambers. And you may recall that it is reputed that Caesar, seeing his friend Brutus attacking him, said, "Et tu, Brute," and turned his head and died. He had been stabbed 23 times. Caesar was 56 years old when that happened. After Caesar's assassination, Caesar's 19-year-old grandnephew, Octavius, chased down and killed the murderers, and eliminated his competitors, including Mark Antony, for leadership of the Republic. He took charge of the Senate, but he accepted the title of Princeps, the leader, thus keeping up the appearance of maintaining the Republic, but with him in charge. And during his reign, he was accorded the title of Augustus, the Holy One, because of the love and respect his subjects had for him. Now, I'm going to take a couple of minutes to tell you more about Augustus, because he was the most powerful and important man in the history of Rome. As Princeps, he was known to be intrepid, cautious, a superb judge of men and events, ruthless, cunning, and wise. He assumed leadership of the territory Julius Caesar had conquered. He expanded it, and he put in place a stable political structure, including the extraordinary step of extending Roman citizenship to all conquered peoples, to give them equal standing with native Italians. Now, this played a major role in cementing the empire into a single unit that obtained peace and prosperity across the known Western world. And it became the foundation of our Western civilization. The anecdotes told about Augustus attest to the love and reverence felt for him in Rome and throughout the empire. And it brings to mind our own policy in the United States, assimilating immigrants from all over the world and granting them the opportunity to earn United States citizenship. And it has been said that only twice in history has a difficult political problem been solved to near perfection. Once by the founders of the United States, and once by Augustus and Rome. Augustus died at the age of 77 after having regenerated his nation and putting it on course to obtain 200 years of unprecedented peace and affluence. This was a period that has been termed Pax Romana, an era of peace that has never since been equaled in the Western world that we inhabit today. During the next 3 centuries, the Romans built magnificent structures all over the empire, structures we see and visit today. The arch, the baths, One of the major things that they did was to build roads from one end of their world to the other to facilitate the movement of troops and to open the world to commerce. And incidentally, that's precisely what General Eisenhower did when he became president. He ordered construction of our national superhighway system for the very same reasons, to provide easy army access to all parts of our country in the event of an enemy invasion, and to open all parts of our country to commerce. The Romans developed into excellent engineers, and one of their best inventions has carried into our daily life today, and that's cement. The Romans invented cement. Imagine the impact this has had on the entire world. Instead of piling stone blocks on top of one another, they made bricks, cemented them together, and put sheets of marble over them as a finished coat with dazzling results. And among the best known of their magnificent structures is the Circus Maximus, which is built for chariot racing and where the early Christians met their fate. Now, this Circus Maximum had a capacity of 250,000 people could attend shows. And if you look in this upper corner here, where these columns are, this is the back door of the emperor's palace. And from there, he could come from his palace and have a front row seat at the races. Nice to be emperor. Another very famous building, the Colosseum. And here we have the Colosseum as it was originally built. This is the ruins that we were in recently. And these are the kinds of improvements, not improvements, or rather things that they did in more recent times to just show different parts of the arena and what they used to do. In other words, to give us an idea of how it operated. This Colosseum was started by Vespasian in 72 AD, and it was completed by his son Titus 8 years later. It seated 50,000 people, and it was so designed it could be emptied of spectators in 15 minutes. It was also provided with a canvas canopy that could be opened overhead to shield the spectators from rain or sun. And it was the setting for immense spectacles, live gladiator combat, wild beast hunts with lions and tigers, and bears brought in from all over the empire. It is reported that in the first inaugural games of that Colosseum, they killed 9,000 animals during the festival. They even staged naval battles because they could flood the arena and send out naval boats, ships, and crews to fight to the death. Now, these spectacles could last for weeks, and they were free to all Romans. Another famous monument built 2,000 years ago and still standing in all its glory is the Pantheon. Its dome, it was a temple built to honor the Roman gods. And its dome, which you see here, its dome is considered an engineering masterpiece. It is the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. And the acoustics in this building are incredible. A person can stand at one end of the building, speak in a normal tone of voice, and be heard clearly on the far side of this enormous building. And it's true, really. I did that. You can do that. They also built, over the years, the Roman Forum, which included the Senate building, the national temples, the national treasury, and other public buildings in this group of buildings here. It was the center of political activity of the empire. Rome was to the Roman Empire what Washington, D.C. is to the United States. And this is where the business of government was conducted. And this first slide shows the Forum as it was 2,000 years ago, and the next slide shows the Forum as it is today. But as the centuries wore on, corruption, decay, and civil wars split the empire, and by 450 AD, Rome was overrun by the Goths, and Italy and the rest of the Western world sank into the centuries-long dark ages. Italy did not regain prominence in world history until the beginning of the Italian Renaissance in the 15th century. In the meantime, Italy had been split into a number of city-states and overrun by other countries, never again to regain the stature it had in the beginning. But today, the Renaissance is considered recognized as the greatest outbreak of man's creative genius the world has ever known. Italy was a major contributor and bringing to the world its advances in science, literature, opera, painting, sculpture, architecture, drama, and travel. Now, I'm going to take you a little deeper into that era of change and progress and describe the high points reached in Italy. Let's start with St. Peter's Church. The shrine of St. Peter was first erected on the spot where St. Peter was buried after his martyrdom around 64 AD. This small shrine was demolished 285 years later on orders from Constantine, the first Christian emperor of Rome, and it was replaced by a new church building. This building you see here. Approximately 1100 years later, this building was old and run down, and in 1506, Pope Julius II laid the first stone of a new basilica during the restoration and enlargement of the old church to give us the cathedral we have today. Several major figures in the Italian Renaissance participated in this work. Bramante was the chief architect of the new basilica. He was succeeded by Michelangelo, who built the dome of the cathedral, who designed the dome of the cathedral, which was the largest in the world at the time. Bernini designed the colonnade. When you go, you'll recall when you go into the church, you have the arms of the colonnade that go around and end at the entrance to the church. That was designed by Bernini. And as well, he designed as well the papal altar, which is this here. And you remember these columns, these are famous columns. And also the throne of St. Peter inside the church. This was the original throne, and this is the throne as it's seen today in the church. The church, a church, has been standing first as a shrine and finally as the church we see today for almost 2,000 years. And as you know, they excavated beneath the main altar and now believe they had found the bones of St. Peter. Now, it was during the Renaissance that we obtained the contributions of some of the most talented people in history. We don't have time, of course, to describe all of the great men who lived and worked during that period, but I'll list a few. We have Michelangelo, the sculptor, who created the statues of David, Moses, and the Pietà. He also designed the Dome of St. Peter, as I pointed out before, which is the largest in the world, and he gave us the monumental paintings in the Sistine Chapel, which we can observe and see today. It is reported that Michelangelo was so engrossed in the statue of Moses when he was carving it, that when he finished, he stepped back, he struck Moses' knee with his bare hand and said, "Speak, Moses." He thought he could make it come to life. Galileo was a physicist and astronomer who invented the telescope and proved the earth revolved around the sun, upending centuries of superstition during which everyone knew that the sun, moon, and the stars revolved around the earth, which of course was flat. And using his telescope, he was able to describe the surface features of the planet Mars and of the moon and discover 4 of Jupiter's moons. This is before anyone knew there were anything out there. His work opened the science of astronomy to the world. Here he's showing the Doge of Venice how to use the telescope. Leonardo da Vinci was a visionary, far ahead of his time. He designed ingenious machines, boats, and even flying machines. And he left his sketches for the world to see. And to all that, we must add his famous paintings, the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper. Leonardo was an all-around genius whose works amaze us to this day. And this little thing you see down here was his sketch of a flying machine that we still see today. Amerigo Vespucci No, we have Columbus first. Christopher Columbus, who sailed to the New World in 1492 with his trio of tiny ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, wondering when he was going to fall off the face of the flat earth, and with only his colossal nerve to drive him on. And Amerigo Vespucci, not as well known to us as Columbus, was a Florentine map maker and explorer who lived and worked during the same period. He also made 3 voyages to the New World, and on one of those voyages, based on his observations with the crude instruments then available to him, he calculated the circumference of the earth. He calculated how big around the earth was, and with an accuracy within 59 miles. Now stop and think. The earth at the equator is about just under 25,000 miles, and he calculated that distance within 59 miles with instruments that we wouldn't even think about using today. His fame was widespread, and our North and South continents, North America, South America, are named after him. Now here's a name you don't hear very often, unless you're a musician, Antonio Stradivari. He made the finest string instruments the world has known. And during his lifetime, Stradivari made 1,116 stringed instruments, of which 650 have survived to this day. His violin design is being used, and his instruments are being played by outstanding artists in the great music halls of the world and are valued in the millions of dollars. Now, do you remember Marco Polo? He traveled to China to visit the court of the Emperor Kublai Khan, where he remained for 24 years. He returned to Italy, and he published the first travelogue, Il Milione, for the rest of the world to read. But just stop and think of, here's a man that traveled thousands of miles, no maps, no real maps that he could follow, and he not only traveled there but returned, and it just must have taken months for him to do this whole thing and walk the whole time. Amazing. This was also the period during which Dante wrote the Divine Comedy, which is read today because of its excellent poetry, in which he describes the inferno, which is hell, purgatory, and paradise. Dante had some critics, and so he described some of them in detail, and he relegated them to the inferno, there to suffer the tortures of the damned. But more importantly, the Italian dialect he used in writing the Divine Comedy was so admired in the field of letters that it is today the official language of Italy. The painters, and there were literally dozens of them, included such greats as Michelangelo, Giotto, Titian, and Fra Lippi. Here's the Fra Lippi, and there's Titian, the self-portrait. They revolutionized art. They were masters, and their works are known and admired to this day. Now, these are just a few of the celebrated scientists and artists and poets, writers, who lived and worked in Italy during the Renaissance, and whose accomplishments made them famous throughout the Western world. But let's move. Let's move into the 1800s, the century featuring the creation and development of Italian opera. One master composer during that period was Giuseppe Verdi. During his long career, he wrote Rigoletto, Aida, Il Trovatore, La Traviata, and 24 other operas. Other distinguished Italian composers of the time include Puccini, Leoncavallo, Rossini, and Scarlatti. Their operas are classics and still performed to this day. We have also heard more than our share, had more of our share of famous opera singers, Caruso and Pavarotti, to name two, Renato Scotto, and Franco Corelli. Now, let's bring our people and history lesson closer to home. Did you know that two Italians, Cesar Rodney and William Parker, from our neighboring state of Delaware, signed the Declaration of Independence in the late 1700s? And moving to the late 1800s, Italians joined the mass migrations from Europe of Irish, German, and Scandinavians, and between 1880 and 1924, it is estimated that 4 million Italians arrived in the United States. And they brought their brains, their ambitions, their energy, and their skills to their new homes, and work. And they were active from the time they arrived. In California, A.P. Giannini opened the Bank of Italy to assist his fellow immigrants, and that today it is the Bank of America, the largest bank in the United States. We have war heroes too. John Bessaloni, a Marine from Raritan, New Jersey, was the first enlisted man to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor in World War II. After being awarded the medal, he was assigned to duty touring the United States selling war bonds. But he was not happy in that assignment, and he requested that he be returned to active duty. He was, and he fought and was killed in action on Iwo Jima. And he was awarded posthumously the Navy Cross for valor in action. And do you know that in World War II, it is estimated that the Italian Americans made up 10% of the armed forces of the United States. Many of us remember Arturo Toscanini, one of the greatest opera and concert conductors of all time. He conducted the famous New York Philharmonic Orchestra. I can recall several anecdotes about Toscanini that were published in Life magazine many years ago that touched on his genius and his temperament. And in one of those, the story goes, shortly after his arrival in the United States, he walked into the auditorium that was being prepared for his evening concert. And he saw technicians busily placing microphones over each section of the orchestra, like the brass, the reeds, strings, percussion, etc. He stopped the person who seemed to be in charge and asked in broken English, "What are they doing?" He was told that the microphones were needed so a technician in the control booth could raise or lower the sound where needed during the concert. Well, he blew his stack. He says, "No, no, no, stop. Remove those microphones, all of them. Only one microphone. Here, right over me. I tell the orchestra how to sound." And in the field of modern science, we have Enrico Fermi, the Nobel Prize winner in physics, to thank for the nuclear research he conducted in Chicago that led to the development of the atomic bomb for the U.S. in World War II. And let us not forget, there are 2 Italians serving our country on the United States Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, Justice Alito and Justice Scalia, who passed away this year. Not bad, 2 out of 9, right? Our Italian presence in the field of entertainment goes way back. You remember Rudolph Valentino, the heartthrob of the 20s? Russ Colombo, the famous crooner before Bing Crosby? And the cool Perry Como, who was on the air for years? And of course, the one and only Frank Sinatra and his friend Dean Martin, famous in his own right, And can we ever forget Mario Lanza, our next-door neighbor from Philadelphia? And the famous Schnazzola, Jimmy Durante, comedian, and Sophia Loren. So the list could go on and on and on. When we turn to the world of sports, we have a baseball Hall of Famer, Joe DiMaggio, the Yankee Clipper, who set a major league record by hitting safely for 56 consecutive games in 1941. That's a record that will stand for years. And Yogi Berra, who was voted most valuable player 3 times in his career as a catcher for the Yankees, a team that won 10 national championships during his 13-year career with the same Yankees. And in boxing, we have Rocky Marciano, the first undefeated heavyweight champion in history. And we can point to Vince Lombardi, the famous coach of the Green Bay Packers, who won 3 national championships before we had Super Bowls, and the Lombardi Trophy, named after him, which is awarded to the Super Bowl winner each year. In the more recent history, at our neighboring university at Penn State, we had the great football coach Joe Paterno, and his teams won 409 games, more than any other major college football coach in history. And finally, last but not least, is our cuisine, developed over the centuries. Have you noticed how many Italian cooking programs there are on TV these days? And where would the world be without pasta, pizza, hoagies, Italian cheeses, and wines? Did you know that the major California wineries are owned and operated by Italian Americans? And finally, the crowning accolade, I'm told that they are opening pizza shops in China. It had to happen. But now I complete my story, and I want to say that I am proud of our place in history, then and now. I am proud of how displaced people have prospered in this new land, and how our children and grandchildren have taken their places in our society as lawyers, doctors, scientists, teachers, athletes, musicians, in every walk of life in these United States. And all I can say is, God bless America. Thank you. Thank you.